Imagine a door between two neighbors. For decades, that door has mostly swung one way: goods, influence, and pressure flowing south from the United States into Mexico. Washington has long acted as if it controlled that door, opening it when convenient, pushing through demands when necessary, and assuming it would never truly close. But at 7:00 a.m. Central Time today, that assumption shattered. In a nationally televised address from the Palacio Nacional in Mexico City, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum did something that instantly sent shockwaves through global markets, supply chains, and political circles. With a single announcement, she effectively slammed that door shut, not halfway, not symbolically, but completely. And the sound you are hearing now, the sound echoing through factories, ports, highways, and trading floors, is the sound of supply chains snapping. It's the sound of assembly lines preparing to slow down. It's the sound of grocery store buyers scrambling to find produce that suddenly isn't coming. It's the sound of a country realizing that a relationship it thought was one-sided might actually be the opposite. Because this morning, Mexico announced an immediate export embargo on 27 categories of goods heading to the United States. Not tariffs, not regulatory slowdowns, not quotas, a complete halt. The policy, which Sheinbaum called the Sovereign Commerce Protocol, stops billions of dollars worth of products from crossing the border starting immediately. And along with the embargo came a clear ultimatum. The United States has 21 days to meet three demands: remove all tariffs placed on Mexican goods, release $6.2 billion in remittance transfers currently frozen by U.S. regulatory actions, and issue a formal public apology acknowledging what Mexico describes as months of economic aggression. At first glance, it might sound like another political standoff between governments, another diplomatic spat, another headline in a long history of trade disputes. But the moment you start looking at the numbers behind it, the scale becomes impossible to ignore. Nearly half of all fresh vegetables consumed in the United States during winter months come from Mexico. More than 1/3 of the auto parts used in American vehicle manufacturing are produced in Mexican factories. Hospitals across the United States rely heavily on medical devices assembled in Mexican industrial zones. Entire sectors of the American economy run through supply chains that cross the U.S.-Mexico border thousands of times every single day. And this morning, those flows were turned off. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand how deeply intertwined the two economies have become over the past 3 decades. The North American manufacturing system isn't structured as separate national industries anymore. It's a shared ecosystem. A car assembled in Michigan might contain an engine block cast in Mexico, wiring harnesses produced in Chihuahua, interior components molded in Monterrey, and electronics shipped from plants outside Guadalajara. Food on grocery shelves follows the same pattern. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, avocados, and berries grown in Mexican farms are harvested, packed, and shipped north in refrigerated trucks that cross the border by the thousands every day. The system works because it moves constantly. The moment it stops moving, the consequences begin immediately. And according to President Sheinbaum's announcement, it has stopped. During her address, she spoke directly to the Mexican public first. Her tone wasn't fiery or theatrical. It was deliberate, measured, and calm, the kind of tone leaders use when they want to project control. She began by framing the past 3 months as a period of escalating economic pressure from Washington. She accused the United States government of imposing tariffs that violate existing trade agreements, freezing billions of dollars in remittance transfers sent by Mexican workers abroad, and repeatedly threatening Mexico's economic sovereignty. Then she paused long enough for the silence to settle and delivered the line that immediately dominated global headlines. For 3 months, she said, the government of the United States has treated Mexico not as a partner, but as a possession. Another pause. Possessions, she continued, do not fight back. Partners do. That sentence set the stage for everything that followed. Sheinbaum then began reading the list of export categories that would be suspended under the Sovereign Commerce Protocol. And as she moved through the list, the scope of the decision became clearer. First came fresh produce, tomatoes, avocados, peppers, cucumbers, leafy greens, berries. Mexico supplies roughly 69% of imported tomatoes in the United States, around 80% of avocados, more than half of imported berries. Those shipments, she said, stopped today. Next came automotive components, engines, transmissions, wiring harnesses, brake systems, interior assemblies. Major U.S. automakers including Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, rely on Mexican manufacturing for between 30 and 55% of certain vehicle components. Those exports stopped today. Then came medical devices. Mexico has become one of the largest exporters of medical equipment to the United States. Surgical tools, catheter components, pacemaker parts, diagnostic hardware, many of them assembled in high-tech manufacturing zones along the border. Those exports stopped today. Then aerospace components, sections of fuselage structures, landing gear assemblies, avionics housings, parts destined for major aerospace contractors. Those exports stopped today. Next came beer and spirits. Mexico exports billions of dollars in beer to the United States every year. Brands that dominate American shelves: Corona, Modelo, Dos Equis, Pacifico. Those shipments, she said, stopped today as well, and the list continued. Electronics assemblies, flat glass, industrial cement, copper, wire, refrigeration units, electrical transformers, plastic injection molds, textiles. By the time she reached the final category, the number attached to the embargo had grown enormous. More than $200 billion in annual exports to the United States. This wasn't a symbolic protest. It was a structural disruption, a removal of goods that the American economy has spent decades building itself around. But the speech didn't end with the embargo announcement. Because after detailing what Mexico would stop exporting, Sheinbaum turned to what the United States would need to do to restart those exports. And that's where the real pressure began. After outlining the 27 export categories that would immediately stop flowing into the United States, President Claudia Sheinbaum shifted the focus of her speech from what Mexico was doing to what the United States would have to do if it wanted the door reopened. She called them the 3 conditions for normalization. They were not vague, they were not negotiable in tone, and they were delivered slowly, as if each one had been designed to land with maximum political weight in Washington. Requirement number 1, the immediate and unconditional removal of all tariffs imposed on Mexican goods. Not partial removal, not a phased reduction. Every tariff currently in place would have to disappear completely. No exceptions, no extended timelines. The deadline for that removal, she said, would be midnight on the 21st day after the announcement. Requirement number 2, the release of $6.2 billion in remittance transfers that Mexico claims have been frozen or delayed through U.S. regulatory actions over the past several months. These remittances represent money sent by Mexican workers abroad, primarily in the United States, to support families back home. According to the Mexican government, the funds have been caught in a web of compliance checks, financial reviews, and regulatory slowdowns that effectively blocked them from reaching recipients. Sheinbaum's description of those funds was blunt. They belong to Mexican families. She said, they are not leverage, they are not bargaining chips, they are wages that have already been earned. Then came the third requirement, and it was the one that immediately sparked the most discussion among political analysts. Requirement number 3. A formal public apology from the President of the United States, not a statement of mutual understanding, not diplomatic language. A direct acknowledgement delivered publicly and on camera that the tariffs imposed over the past 3 months violated existing trade agreements and that Mexico is a sovereign partner deserving of respect. Sheinbaum even acknowledged during the speech that this demand would likely be the most difficult for Washington to accept. I understand, she said, that humility is not always comfortable in politics. Then she added a line that observers immediately recognized as carefully calculated. But Mexico has endured months of humiliation. A moment of humility from the United States is not too much to ask. It was a statement that instantly placed the U.S. administration in a difficult position. Meeting the first 2 demands might be politically controversial, but technically possible. The third demand, a public apology, is something many political leaders, especially those who built reputations on strength and defiance, would find extremely difficult to deliver. In other words, the conditions were not just economic, they were psychological. But the most surprising part of the story isn't actually the demands themselves. It's the evidence suggesting that Mexico may have been preparing for this moment long before the announcement was made. Over the past several weeks, trade analysts began noticing unusual patterns in logistics data across northern and central Mexico. Warehouses were filling up, transportation schedules were shifting, and certain export volumes were quietly slowing even before any official policy change had been announced. Satellite imagery reviewed by several international logistics monitoring firms showed something striking: a massive surge in warehouse utilization across key industrial hubs. Facilities in Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Ciudad Juarez were suddenly operating at capacity. Automotive components that normally would have been shipped north within days were sitting in storage. Cold storage warehouses designed for produce exports were being filled to levels far beyond their typical seasonal demand. Medical equipment manufacturing centers were producing at normal speeds, but shipments were not leaving the country at the usual rate. According to analysts tracking the data, warehouse utilization at several major Mexican logistics centers increased by more than 300% compared with the same period earlier in the year. That kind of shift doesn't happen by accident. It suggests preparation because when an export economy suddenly stops shipping goods to its largest customer, the immediate danger is factory shutdowns and layoffs. But if you have weeks of production already stored, you can keep workers employed while searching for alternative buyers. And that brings us to the second piece of evidence that has raised eyebrows among economists and diplomats alike. Reports have surfaced that Mexico spent the past 2 months quietly negotiating alternative export agreements with other major global markets. According to trade documents cited by multiple international outlets, provisional agreements have already been discussed with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Brazil. Together, those potential deals could redirect tens of billions of dollars worth of goods that normally flow into the United States. The agreements reportedly include accelerated customs processing, reduced tariffs, and guaranteed purchase volumes, essentially fast-tracking the redirection of supply chains that were originally built around the U.S. market. If those agreements hold, it means Mexico isn't simply stopping exports and hoping the pressure forces Washington to respond. It means Mexico may already have new customers waiting. But the third development is the one that has truly caught the attention of strategic analysts in Washington. Because according to financial sources cited in several reports, China's central bank at the People's Bank of China may have extended a massive currency swap line to Mexico's central bank. The reported figure is around $50 billion. If accurate, that arrangement would allow Mexico to stabilize its currency during the economic disruption caused by the embargo and continue financing imports, even while dollar revenue from U.S. exports declines. Currency swap lines are not unusual in international finance, but they are usually arranged between long-standing financial partners. When they appear suddenly during a geopolitical standoff, they often signal something larger. Because swap lines don't just provide liquidity, they buy time. And time is exactly what any country needs when it enters an economic confrontation with a larger trading partner. But the reported details don't stop there. According to sources familiar with the discussions, the financial arrangement could also include provisions for expanded Chinese investment in Mexican manufacturing, potential cooperation in strategic minerals such as lithium, and expanded infrastructure projects connected to Pacific ports. If even a portion of those reports proves accurate, it would mean that what began as a bilateral trade dispute between the United States and Mexico could quickly become part of a much larger global strategic competition. While Washington focused on tariffs and trade negotiations, other powers may have been quietly positioning themselves to support Mexico and expand their own influence in North America at the same time. And that brings us to the question everyone is asking now: how quickly will ordinary people begin to feel the impact of this embargo? Because while political debates can take weeks or months to unfold, supply chains operate on a much shorter clock. And according to industry analysts, that clock has already started ticking. Once the announcement ended and the cameras stopped rolling in Mexico City, the real question immediately shifted from politics to logistics. How fast would the impact travel? Because modern supply chains operate on a principle called just-in-time delivery. Instead of storing massive inventories, companies keep only a few days of components on hand and rely on constant shipments to keep production moving. It's efficient, it lowers storage costs, and for decades it has worked remarkably well. But that efficiency comes with a hidden vulnerability. When the flow stops, the system doesn't slow down gradually, it stops abruptly. And according to supply chain analysts who began running projections shortly after the announcement, the consequences of the embargo could begin showing up in American households far faster than most people expect. The first sector expected to feel the shock is grocery retail. Every winter, when colder temperatures reduce harvests across much of the United States, grocery stores rely heavily on produce grown in Mexico. Refrigerated trucks cross the border constantly, day and night, delivering tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, avocados, berries, and leafy greens. Under normal conditions, roughly $1.2 billion worth of goods cross the U.S.-Mexico border every single day. If that flow stops, grocery chains don't have months of backup inventory sitting in warehouses. Fresh produce doesn't last that long. Industry models estimate that visible shortages could begin appearing within 72 hours. First, it would show up as limited availability. Certain items missing from shelves, smaller displays, fewer restocks overnight, then prices would begin climbing quickly as distributors compete for whatever alternative supply they can find. Avocados could be among the first products affected. Mexico produces the vast majority of avocados consumed in the United States, and demand for them is massive year-round. Analysts estimate that if shipments stopped completely, avocado prices could triple within a week. Tomatoes might follow close behind. Prices could double within 10 days as wholesalers scramble to source replacements from Florida greenhouses, Canada, or overseas suppliers. But even those alternatives would only cover a fraction of the demand. By the end of the second week, some analysts believe as much as 30% of produce sections in American grocery stores could appear partially empty or significantly reduced, and that's just food. The second sector expected to feel immediate pressure is automobile manufacturing. The North American automotive industry is one of the most tightly integrated supply systems on the planet. A single vehicle can cross the U.S.-Mexico border multiple times during the manufacturing process as different components are assembled in different locations. Wiring harnesses might come from one Mexican factory, transmission parts from another, interior components from a third. Assembly plants in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Texas rely on those parts arriving on precise schedules. If they don't arrive, production lines stop. And according to internal estimates reported by industry sources, many U.S. automakers currently hold less than 10 days of certain critical Mexican-made components. General Motors reportedly has roughly a 7-day supply of wiring harnesses. Ford may have about 9 days of transmission components. Once those inventories run out, assembly lines begin shutting down. Industry groups estimate that by the end of the second week of a full embargo, up to 60% of North American vehicle production could be temporarily offline. Every day those factories sit idle represents hundreds of millions of dollars in lost output and thousands of workers sent home without shifts. The third sector expected to experience disruptions is one many people never think about until something goes wrong. Medical supply chains. Mexico has become a major manufacturing hub for medical devices over the past 2 decades. Surgical tools, catheter components, diagnostic hardware, and specialized hospital equipment are produced in large industrial parks across northern Mexico. Hospitals usually maintain limited reserves of these products because they are designed to arrive through continuous distribution networks. If exports stop, hospitals won't feel the impact immediately. But within 10 days, some procedures could begin facing delays due to limited supplies of specialized instruments. Certain surgeries might be postponed. Some medical equipment repairs could take longer due to missing replacement components. It's not the kind of disruption that makes headlines immediately, but it can quietly ripple through healthcare systems over time. Meanwhile, the physical reality at the border is already changing. Normally, thousands of trucks cross major border checkpoints like Laredo every day, carrying everything from fresh produce to industrial machinery. But if the embargo is enforced fully, those trucks don't move. Loading docks sit empty. Shipping schedules collapse. Warehouses on the U.S. side begin waiting for deliveries that never arrive. All of this began unfolding just hours after the announcement, which is why the reaction inside the White House reportedly shifted from surprise to concern very quickly. According to sources familiar with internal discussions, economic advisors gathered early in the morning for emergency briefings. The realization that quickly emerged was simple but troubling. Tariffs and trade policies often operate in abstract economic space. Percentages, negotiations, long timelines. But empty grocery shelves are not abstract. They are visible. They create immediate political pressure. And once supply chains begin breaking down in public view, it becomes extremely difficult for any government to control the narrative. Reports suggest that during an emergency meeting later that morning, the president asked 2 direct questions. First, can the United States force Mexico to resume exports? Advisors reportedly explained that under international law, a sovereign nation cannot be compelled to export goods. Countries are free to decide where their products are sold. Second, can alternative suppliers replace Mexico quickly? That answer was even less encouraging. While other countries do produce similar goods, none can match the combination of scale, proximity, and infrastructure that Mexico provides to the United States. Replacing that supply would require building new production networks across multiple countries, a process that could take years, not weeks. Later that day, the White House released a public statement condemning the embargo and describing it as an act that would harm Mexican workers more than American consumers. But financial markets reacted almost immediately, and not in a reassuring way. The stock market experienced sharp declines as investors attempted to calculate the economic damage that prolonged supply disruptions could cause. Automaker stocks fell dramatically, retail chains dropped, agricultural commodity prices spiked as traders anticipated sudden surges in demand for domestically produced alternatives. Within hours, industry groups began calling on policymakers to find a resolution before the disruption deepened. And that's when the political pressure started building. Because when businesses start calculating losses in the hundreds of millions per day, patience runs out very quickly. By early afternoon, the reaction was no longer limited to economists and financial markets. Industry organizations began issuing statements that revealed just how serious the situation could become if the embargo lasted more than a few days. The American Automotive Policy Council, which represents major U.S. car manufacturers, warned that every day of disrupted supply could cost the industry hundreds of millions of dollars in lost production. Assembly plants can't simply switch part suppliers overnight. Production systems are designed around precise engineering standards, contracts, and logistics networks that take years to build. When one link in that chain disappears, the entire process stalls. And when assembly lines stall, the consequences cascade quickly. Factories slow down, workers are sent home, dealership inventories shrink. The ripple effects spread far beyond the factories themselves. Restaurants, trucking companies, equipment suppliers, and local economies built around those manufacturing hubs all begin feeling the impact. Grocery industry groups issued their own warnings soon afterward. The National Grocers Association indicated that supermarkets in southern and western states could begin experiencing noticeable produce shortages within 48 hours if shipments from Mexico did not resume. Prices for remaining stock could increase dramatically, in some cases by 40% or more, depending on the product. That's when the political response started accelerating. Stay informed with BCC News. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a critical update.